Right, hello, welcome to episode 15 of the Sisyphus complex solution. Hopefully you might notice there's a little bit of difference in that. Up until now I've had the edges of the screen that have remained in black, and I'm trying to fill the screen out a little bit, and that so you can I can ideally have some of the graphics that I put up and that a little bit more visible, so you can actually read what it is that I'm putting up, because I know a lot of you don't click on the links in the description, but I'll still keep including them nevertheless. So the episode this week is called Eyes Sewn Shut. If you don't know what I'm referring to there, then first and foremost that's your own fault for not looking in the looking at the quote at the beginning, and go back and have a look at it, then come back in and you'll get to understand as I'm going forward. So I'm not going to be doing much in the way of video recommendations this week, because I have seen some good stuff in that I think would be of interest to people, but it's largely around facts to do with this the Ponzi China virus and whatever and that. So I mean, I'm sure lots of people will get sick to death of that, but if you want somebody that's actually saying something that makes sense, have a look at Ivor Cummings, for example. So not really any need for me to push those areas too much, so I just want to go straight into the Sisyphus complex solution this week, keeping in mind we're still looking within the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy department, and so within there we begin with Companies House. Companies House is obviously the one where everybody has to register the name of the company, the names of the directors and so forth, and it's where you file your annual reports. It does come with some levels of revenue production, hence the 6.5 million budget there, and that is a net figure, so you know, nothing too excessive in terms of burden to the taxpayer. It could be considered that maybe there's ways to look at this in terms of, well, as a registration service itself, and that there could be relative reasoning to look at it and think, well, maybe if it's a revenue generated service and that, it should actually be at least breaking even. So maybe within a review process we might be able to look towards some level of achieving that. I mean, it would depend year on year, but obviously in that, as you can see from some of the key figures that they've got from their annual report, it seems like they're certainly active enough. Obviously, just because a company is registered, it doesn't necessarily mean they're getting fees from them every year. And I mean, I don't pay the Companies House every year, but you know, I think there's enough activity, and I'm sure they're getting an awful lot of dissolved companies at the moment, and then hopefully the moment that somebody actually has a brain fart and puts an end to all of the nonsense that's going on, they might be able to actually see more new companies coming out, depending on the extent of the damage. But anyway, a couple of pieces I wanted to highlight from the reports was that from the goals that they've stated, where I've highlighted it in red, and combating economic crime, but then I also want to combine that with the system that they're talking about, which is again highlighted in red below that, around this modern identity and access management system. Exactly what it is that they're talking about there, and that, I mean, aside from having yet another sort of another fancy name for a website where you can just literally do a search, I can't really see the purpose at all for having something that is you know, like a mobile phone app or anything like that, or trying to, I mean, seriously, how many people look into the Companies House? I mean, I do, but most people don't. But those two key pieces of information that they're talking about in terms of what they're supposed to be doing now and what they're looking to be doing in the future, there's areas around that firstly suggest what kind of development is it that they're talking about, what is it they're referring to. And then the second thing is it's really around whether they are actually competently running the service in terms of this combating economic crime, because I'm going to go into an example in the next slide as to where this is. You could combine these two and that to say, well, yep, something's not quite right there. There have been a number of occasions, I mean, I don't know if people do this for themselves now, but whenever you're coming across a client, assuming, you know, I mean, most countries have a similar sort of database to this, that if you're coming across a client and you want to know who you're dealing with, and that you have a quick check in company's house, make sure they exist first and foremost, and who actually owns it, because, you know, quite often you'll have somebody that will say, well, you know, I'm the person with authority, but if they're not actually listed as a director, then do they? So obviously, in that for much larger companies, and that it tends to be a bit more straightforward, that you're going to be reasonably okay. You're concentrating on the your terms of payment. But for smaller companies in particular, having a check doesn't really hurt, and it can save you a bit of arseache later on when you hopefully have found out that you shouldn't really be bothering too much, because you might not get paid and God knows what else might happen. The same thing goes for when you're looking for a job. If you want to be employed by a smaller company, have a look. But anyway, because I don't want to drag on too much, ideally today, as I tend to do. So let's move into this example. Now, even with the wider screen and that, you're still going to struggle to see this. The example I've got here of them being able to competently understand who should be remaining able to put their name down as a director, whether they've had any issues in the past that should potentially be flagged up, is in relation to this particular company called VST Enterprises, where the news keeps coming out where there's more people seem to be giving them money and ridiculous valuations put on this company. I think the last valuation I saw was something like around about 225 million, something like that, and that was just off of the back of getting another £11 million investment, which doesn't make a great deal of sense. They're claiming to be able to do this the COVID pass that's going to be on your mobile phones, or everybody keeps claiming it's going to be on your mobile phones, and they've managed to wangle in that Mike and Zara Tindall, which is Royal Family Connections. Now, they're both supposedly ambassadors rather than actually a part of the company, but nevertheless, if you're lending your name to something, then you should really be mindful as to who it is that you're dealing with. So, what's all of this that I've got spread all over the screen? Essentially, this is something where there won't be any links in the description that provides all this information, because this is my research, and obviously I'm not publishing it, I'm just putting it up here. Obviously I've got access to it and that, but it's not something that you can just click through and find for yourself. What you'd have to do is you start your search with the likes of VST Enterprises, and you find out who the investing companies and who the investing individuals are, and then you investigate who they are. And essentially, there are certain individuals associated with this company where the level of failure of the individuals is quite staggering. Now, I'll point to the rather large number there, and that the 0.15 risk. Fuck's sake, 0.15% risk. The English language is so difficult. That doesn't refer to the risk that's associated with these people. That's me pointing out what a pathetic risk there is involved in the nonsense of these people trying to say that you're supposed to have a mobile phone that tells you whether you're going to be a risk factor or not, whether you've actually got the China virus or not. So, you know, the next one they'll come out with, and that is if you've got the rhino virus, you know, you've got the sniffles. Fucking idiots. But anyway, certain individuals that are involved in this company. If you combine them all together, there's 23 companies, and some. I mean, like I said, there was one fella in that I can't remember what his name is. It should be written up there somewhere. Yeah, this Davis. What is his name? Davis. Oh, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he's the one that's stood in the picture and that next to Mike Tindall. Oh, he's a reasonably young fella. Apparently claims to have been an ex-musician and whatever. And I mean, having the amount of companies he seems to have been a director of at the same time as being this international musician that nobody's ever heard of. Quite an achievement. But everybody that's involved in this organisation have been involved in failure after failure. So there's 23 failures in total. 26 insolvencies, and the reason why you end up with more insolvencies than failures is because it's essentially a different level of failure. It's an even worse level of failure than just a regular failure. I mean, you can just shut down your company of your own free will because you don't want to continue it, but the insolvency means that you basically really fucked up. But then there's even worse than that, where there are cases against them. There's me forgetting to turn off my phone. The cases against them literally means that they've probably had, generally speaking, means that you've had like the bank has been in touch, and debtors, things of this nature. So it becomes much more of a serious issue. So when you're looking at a company with individuals involved that have got this extent of failure, you would surely expect not only the people that are lending their name to it, but the company's house to have some sort of a flag system to say, hang on a minute. Because all of these companies that have been failing, I mean, one of them, for example, and that there's a lawyer, apparently a lawyer, involved in the company, and he's been a director of three other companies to date. All three have failed. How the hell do you get to be a lawyer involved in three companies over not a very long period of time and all three of them fail? I mean, considering how much money a lawyer charges, I mean, you could just sit at home and say that you're a lawyer and that, just do things on a, you know, get in touch with me and I'll pop over and see you type of basis, like a freelance basis, and not fail. So, I mean, you've got to be some sort of spectacular tosser to be failing when you're a lawyer. And he's going to be representing all of this. And like I said, I mean, one of the directors, whose name is it? This? No, he's not a director. Sorry, it's Tom Hetherington, I think his name is. Yeah. Yeah. Tom Hetherington. He's not actually a named director in that, but he's one of the senior managers in the organisation, and a number of the connections that have been established as a part of this organisation have come through the long list of failure. I mean, the graphic that I've got over there that takes up, you know, the larger percentage of the graphic, all of those are the companies that he's been involved with. And then look at the failure rate. It's just ridiculous. So him alone, there's 24 organisations there that he's been involved with. 12 of, so a 50% failure rate, and they've ended up with 26 cases amongst them. That's cases and insolvencies, sorry. So I mean, he's essentially responsible for all of them out of everybody. And then the other ones and that have just literally just shut down and failed. It is a case of anybody getting involved with these people to be able to run their own due diligence. But at the same time, when you've got the company's house that's saying that they are going to be looking out for economic criminality or anything of that nature, the one key part where they can and should have some relationship with other government departments, and and I have a feeling it's something that's going to happen with this one as well, is that the contracts that they're going to be looking towards achieving are going to be based on being paid through the government. In a similar way, they will also likely they'll tap into like the innovation grant system to apparently develop their app, for which the core technology I've seen behind it, and it's, oh, Christ almighty, that you probably got more data stored on a barcode on a bag of sugar. But the point would be is that the companies should be investigated to see how much money they've received in innovation funds via largely the BEIS department, and then how much money have they received through any government contracts. And if you're seeing a pattern develop where they're just consistently taking grants, receiving government contract, close, grants, contract, close, if you see that kind of thing taking place, they should not be allowed to run another company. So I don't think that the Companies House is quite on the ball insofar as that's concerned. So I thought I'd give an example as to when you're talking about these obsession with we've got to have the latest data and we've got to have the latest technology, and that it's not always a particularly relevant thing to be looking at, and it's also something where people need to understand, does it actually bloody work? And then when they're supposed to be looking at any sort of discrepancies or potential issues of individuals owning companies, this looks to me like a prime candidate for a big miss from the Companies House, and I have a feeling this company is going to cost the government and a whole range of other people an awful lot of money, because I think that at the last count the intended contract that they might be awarded is to be having something like this app downloaded in 50 million on 50 million phones. It's just not going to happen, and then they'll just run away with the money. There is another one of their companies in that way, which I'm not going to go into, and that because I'll end up probably getting into fucking trouble or something. But one of the companies does have an outstanding issue around precisely that kind of thing, and it does seem like the core fella has actually learnt how to do this sort of thing by way of his father. But the capitalist system, apparently, according to some that don't know what they're talking about. This is government idiocy is what this is. Seeing as I'd mentioned previously, and that's about the videos I've watched over the Ponzi China virus, and leading into this 0.15 risk, there is a part that I'm just going to add on to that's not relevant to the Companies House, but as soon as we got that number up, I just thought I'll give a couple of little details. I had done some of the numbers on this myself. I had planned to do another commentary short specifically on this subject, but other things took over. And so going back to data on September the 25th, as much as this particular risk that's being stated, that is what's known as the IFR rate, which is the, I can't remember what the I stands for now, and I've only written IFR, twat. Anyway, have a look what IFR stands for. It's the estimated fatality rate, and that is as a total, rather than people that have actually been reported as cases, and that you have to estimate those that have had it but have not been reported. They reckon the overall risk ratio across all age groups is going to be 0.15%. The numbers for the UK as it stands at the moment, as the average, but on a CFR base, so that is case fatality ratio, the average is 0.66% at the moment in the UK. The vast majority of that is made up, in terms of the higher numbers that take that percentage upwards, it's taken up by, as everybody's been told time and time again, the over 75s. So younger people, the risk ratio there, and that is ridiculously low. Essentially, there's one other piece of information that I've heard just literally earlier on today, actually, from Professor John Lee. And he reckons that for younger people, risk ratio, even when all is done, is going to be around about 0.05%. So again, when you're talking about lockdowns and stupid bloody passes on your phone and nonsense, I mean, it is farcical. And it doesn't really matter which age group you look at. Across the board, I mean, generally speaking, it tends to get broken down into 5-year demographics. It doesn't matter which age group you look at, there's a higher risk of you going into the toilet than there is of dying of this crap. So, yeah. Just another little bit of an add-on piece of information, seeing as I was intending to provide that before. And because my details had taken place on September the 25th, the risk ratio that the case fatality ratio that I've got written down would actually be quite a bit less than 0.66 now. Obviously, because there'll have been fewer deaths compared to the larger amount of cases. So, like I say, anybody out there that's doing any bedwetting, they're probably either A, bedwetting because they're idiots, or they're still idiots, but they're bedwetting because they're scared of the risk of going into the bathroom. Could be the explanation. Anyway, so that's the company's house. There's some reviews required there. Right, into the Insolvency Service. This is again another unusual one, and that the cost to the taxpayer is pretty significant, considering 309 million, well, nearly 310 million. In terms of what it is that they're supposed to actually be doing, obviously, yeah, you got the description there. You can see what it is that they're supposed to be doing, but I'm at a bit of a loss as to the point of this department in terms of being a taxpayer responsibility. And the prime reason that I think a lot of people will be familiar with is how via the Insolvency Service and then via other departments having to get involved as well, when there was the failure of Cargill that ended up costing at least, I think it was actually more, but I'll just go with the numbers that I've got for the time being. The cost to the taxpayer of £162 million in terms of being able to continue the responsibilities of the organisation whilst it went through its insolvency. The problem I've got is, as you can see from the bottom graphic there, that when PwC received £50 million in order to essentially perform the insolvency, then what's the point of the Insolvency Service? And you're giving them best part of £310 million for them to give £50 million to a private company to actually perform the service. Now, will there be a range of different companies that are going insolvent, and then all of a sudden that's the one that they couldn't quite cope with? Seems a bit unlikely. And like I said, most companies, apart from those chances that I highlighted before, you're not talking about really great difficult levels of work here. And when it does become slightly more complex, that is always going to be with obviously much larger companies. Well, plainly, if they're just, when they come across a larger company, they're handing it over to the private sector. So it makes me think, yeah, you're not necessary. So in terms of this department, I think that my initial consideration is that this is something that can be handled in the private sector, and we don't really need this kind of a tax burden. And when you also combine the other departments of government, so for example, like you've got the Companies House, you've got the HMRC, that obviously that we'll be going into later. When you've got the legal departments and so forth, I don't really see why there's not something that could be sorted out that would remove this from the equation, because they're clearly not able to perform the task that they are intended for. So what I will be doing, as much as anything else, and that you turn around and say, okay, well, you can go in and have a quick review, but on the face of it, gone. Doesn't make any sense to me. Right, so not that much else to say about them. Right, into the Intellectual Property Office. Now, if you remember last week, and we had the very rare scenario of a department that was actually a net contributor, and so it is again this week. Not by much, but still a net contributor, the Intellectual Property Office. I'm not going to congratulate them that much. I'm not going to say that they're good. Largely down to not necessarily issues that are specific to the UK version of this department, because there are a few things around this, which is that I've given some examples to the side here, and that to say that issues have crept in because of interference around the World Trade Organization. What they do tend to forget in that particular article is when you're talking about the World Trade Organization, it also then, which keep in mind is the United Nations, it also then includes WIPO, the World International Patent Office, something like that, or World Intellectual Property Office. Anyway, there are certain essentially diktats that come out. I mean, for people to understand intellectual property as an international agreement, there's commonality amongst a number of nations, but then in various other countries, and that in China is the obvious example, where their intellectual property laws and that basically might as well just not exist. I think there is room for people to maintain a domestic proposition, and if at a later stage, in that we firstly look at our own system to see how it works and whether it works correctly, and then see how well that fits with international, and then you can talk about your international agreements later on. There are issues, obviously, and that is I've pointed out below as well, in terms of larger organisations that are absolutely dead set on maintaining their intellectual property rights. I mean, this is where things become a little bit more difficult. That is, it does end up being something that needs to be sorted out through the department and with the advice of wider industry. But I do come across all too often the case of certain individuals that are speaking from a more libertarian perspective, and I'm not referring to Scotty M on this one, by the way. This is more to do with the likes of James Corbett and people like that, where they don't really seem to like the whole idea of intellectual property, and I tend to disagree with that. I think that the Intellectual Property Office, and that does serve a purpose. I think intellectual property itself serves a purpose. I just think it's largely misunderstood. It can be abused by the larger organisations, but then that's where you start to look at where things could be modified, simplified, improved. And the improvement is that you don't end up with these silly scenarios whereby you've got a piece of you've developed a piece of technology, product, whatever it's going to be, and then somebody can look at that and think, well, okay, great, I want to be able to reproduce that, but I'm not prepared to pay the intellectual property owner any rights to use that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a tiny little alteration, and then I've got my own patent. Now, it should be the case, and in the right handling of it, it would be the case that they would still end up having to pay a level of rights to the owner. However, what does tend to happen is that the larger companies, they'll then fight it on the basis saying, no, we've tweaked it, therefore that is ours. And they tend to win because the smaller sized intellectual property owners and that are not able to withstand the cost to maintain the fight against it. So that kind of area needs to be levelled out. I think there should be something that's more along the lines of a standard sort of tribunal office, at least to begin with. Whether it's then going to have to go through all manner of court systems and that would be something that gets looked at within the review process. But one of the other bigger problems that we tend to have with most organisations is, again, it's largely down to academia. There's an awful lot of intellectual property that could be developed through academia, and it generally doesn't tend to happen because they haven't got a clue what they're doing with it. That might sound harsh, it's just a simple fact. And the reason why they don't have a problem, I mean, there's a whole range of different organisations out there that say that they are purposely built to provide services to academia to be able to monetize that intellectual property. And yet every single time that I've come across any of these organisations, they are staggeringly unrealistic in their expectations. There is very, very little in the way of understanding in terms of what are known as ratchet systems. So you can start off with a low level cost, and then it can increase to the intended level, but even then it shouldn't be that much, because the more that you're going to try to charge somebody for it, and generally speaking they'll turn around and say, oh, it's going to be based on a percentage. So the larger the percentage it is, it doesn't matter what the cost of the product is going to be at the end of the day, you're going to be taking such a ridiculously large chunk off of the actual producer that it just makes it completely uneconomical. So for example, if you've got somebody that turns around and says, well, okay, well, I want 20% of the net, you know, well, piss off. No, it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. And people need to be understanding as to who they're going to be going into partnership with. The immediate reaction of most intellectual property holders in academia is that we want to go with the largest company possible, who are going to spread us all over the world, and then we're all going to be millionaires tomorrow because of it. And it's just a fantasy world for a number of different reasons. So the intellectual property going into a larger organisation can, and does quite often, specifically in Asian nations, the agreement can be made to provide a certain amount of money to have the patent, usually on their terms, and that it ends up being a fixed fee. But that fixed fee is then to make sure that that intellectual property is stifled. It never sees the light of day. You might think, well, why would anybody do that? Well, because it will eat into the product range and the ideas that they already got. They just don't want you to be a competitor with them. So there are areas like that to consider. It does become a very wide and complicated area of business, but it can be simplified, it can be levelled out so that any intellectual property owner, irrespective of size, can be given an even hand to be able to handle any complaints or problems of property theft by larger organisations, so that it's not all down to who's got the most expensive lawyers, things of this nature. It obviously has to be simplified in order to be able to get rid of some of the problems that are up on the screen here, in terms of, I mean, some of the ludicrous nonsense that they've talked about and had issues with because of the rules that came in at that point, where people are trying to get patents and trademarks and things like that for bloody plants that grow in another country and things of this nature. I mean, there's got to be some level of common sense, which is always the biggest problem with most things, and that most people just don't seem to have common sense. So I would definitely suggest a review of this department. But there was something else that caught my eye when I was looking through their annual report, and it was a very specific statement, which I'll go to in the next slide. So, making it a brilliant place to work, and they seem to be proud, because I mean, as you know, in every single department we've come across, diversity, blah blah blah, postmodernist bullshit. But they're within the 2019 Stonewall Workplace Equality Index Top 30 employer. Now that's the first time I've come across that name in all of these, in the departments that we've looked at so far. It's the first time I've come across that name, and it made me think, well, who the bloody hell are you? So the rest of the stuff below there, and that is letting you know who the bloody hell they are, or to some degree. And if anybody wonders how all of the postmodernist bullshit creeps into departments, this is a prime example of how it works. So if we'd start by looking over at the far side, and these are the organisations that provide donations, and it includes the Department for Education, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, NHS Scotland, Scottish Government, Welsh Government. I've put the People's Postcode Lottery in there because that's part of something else that I've been discovering this week and posting on Parler and Minds about, where that particular organisation advertises, oh, when you play the postcode lottery and that, we give money to local charities. No, you don't. You're funding shit like this, and also a whole bunch of the pedo organisations like UNICEF and Oxfam, and you're giving money to all of the green lunatics like Greenpeace that just lie at every given moment. So yeah, not a fan. But anyway, there's government departments that are actually funding this Stonewall. They're called, it's Stonewall Equality Limited, in case you're interested. So they're giving money into a so-called non-profit to then give themselves accreditation to say that they're one of their departments is one of the best employers. Absolute garbage. You can see from the from their little version of identity politics, all the different breakdown of their demographic. Once again, doesn't represent what the nation actually looks like at all. So if it doesn't represent what the nation looks like, it's not equality then, is it? Just all over the place. Then you've got the further problems, and this is something that particularly came to my attention because I know there's been a viral video going around about what's her name, Kemi Badenoch. Don't know that name, but anyway, Kemi Badenoch, MP, Conservative Party, who stood up at the dispatch box this week and said that the government did not support critical race theory, and reminded people that critical race theory and what is essentially this racist ideology is actually illegal in this country. Well, that kind of presents a problem which does refer to why I've got the title of Eyes Sewn Shut. Because if you'd actually bother pulling the threads out so you could open your eyes, you might see that she's claiming that they're not in support of something that they're actually funding to take place, and which is actually taking place in our schools. Because this organisation has entered into schools, and they're not only a part of this. The three in the middle, and that the middle of the three in the middle. You've got the intersectional approach. The intersectional approach basically includes the likes of critical race theory. It's just pure identity politics, that one. But above that, you've got the going into schools to discuss relationships, which is that programme that I will be going into at the right time, around the sexualisation of children. So again, why have you got an MP standing at the dispatch box saying that something is illegal, and then they are actually funding one of these tentacles that is going out and into the schools and doing exactly what it is that they say that is illegal? That's what's known as a lie. So she's either willfully ignorant, not paying any bloody attention whatsoever, or because, I mean, you know, if you're a part of the government and you are going to go out and make a statement like that, make sure that you don't come back looking like a liar, which this tells me she was. I've highlighted one other organisation down the bottom, which is the Monument Trust. The reason why I've highlighted them is because they actually kept this organisation afloat last year, giving over £1 million, which made me think, well, okay then, so let's dig a little bit deeper, and who the hell is the Monument Trust? And it's basically one of a series of different trusts and foundations and whatever of the Sainsbury's family. Now, the Sainsbury's family, everybody in the UK at least, and that is going to know what Sainsbury's is. It's the the big department store, retail store, whatever. The Sainsbury's family only owns 15% of that, as things stand. So they're not the majority holder of what they essentially created. The larger owned shares of Sainsbury's now is by the Qatar Investment Authority, which tells another story as well. But the thing about it is that there's that remaining influence within Sainsbury's. And if you remember, not too long ago, literally about a week or two ago, and that how Sainsbury's made this announcement that they were going to be training their staff in terms of exactly this sort of bullshit, and how they didn't want racists in their stores, not even the shoppers. They don't want racists in the stores. So basically, if you're teaching critical race theory, that essentially means that you don't want white people in your store, which seems a bit odd, don't you think? I mean, this sort of bullshit, anybody that is going along with this and saying that this is okay of some description, I think this would actually give me a business idea. And the idea would be to do essentially what they're doing, but in such a way that I wouldn't use flowery language around it. I would literally just turn around and say, okay, my business plan is this. You give me X amount of money, and I'll come round to your house, or we'll do a Skype call or whatever, and I will call you all the wankers under the sun and tell you that you've got to shut your mouth while I'm doing it. And at the end, you will say thank you and pay me. Because if you boil it down to what it actually is, that's essentially what these people are doing. That's what this Sainsbury's family, bunch of idiots, are promoting, and probably getting a bit of backhand assistance there as well to be able to do it. So, if there is anybody out there that wants to be really heavily verbally insulted by me and then will pay me for doing it, drop me a line. Yeah, happy to help. Otherwise, if you're not really of a mind to take up that service, you might want to have a think about what you're actually going to be accepting. Again, all links in the description. Not making this shit up. Have a look for yourselves. I thought that was worth highlighting, seeing as I was running through it. But anyway, that was within the Intellectual Property Office. In terms of the Intellectual Property Office itself, and that's it, there would be a case of the review, much more of a business-centric minded perspective to look at it. I personally would keep it open. I do see the need for intellectual property. I just think it needs to have those refinements and take some of the emphasis away from these United Nations influences, because that's probably where things have started to go wrong. So, the 3 departments that I'll have been dealing with this week. So this lets us know where we stand. So I'll have done 1, 2, 3, 4. Hang on a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, I've done six departments out of BEIS so far. Now remember, I'm looking towards hitting that 10 billion mark that they suggested it would be in the departmental budget. Because we've had the 2 departments, the Land Registry and now the Intellectual Property Office, that are net contributors, we're still in positive numbers of close to 5 million for those 6 departments. But because there's some serious stuff to come, I can guarantee that won't last. So we're still looking towards seeing if that 10 billion will be matched, so that the BEIS side will remain at that particular total amount. But this is the state of play as things stand. And because I've got a slightly bigger screen involved this time, I can turn around and say, well, okay, the cumulative taxpayer saving has changed a little, because I've obviously included the 310 million, near as damn it, from the Insolvency Office, because, as I say, as things stand, I'd look to abolish that. Why bother if they're sending it to the private sector? In terms of the so you can see I've put where I've got abolished CSPL, SVPA, RBSS, GEM, and I've added IS. I'm going to understand this at the end, and then everybody else will understand when I actually display the full spreadsheet. But just stick it in there and that for abbreviation for the time being, so I've got space to stick loads more in there. And then just put a review down at the bottom there. So I've added CH and IPO, so Companies House, Intellectual Property Office. Okay, so that's this week's part of the Sisyphus Complex Solution, in terms of running through the process and seeing what the problems are within government before we look towards heading for proper full government solutions. Which then takes us into this.
Fuck off! Who you think you are, you cheeky fucking twat!
I hope that FOWEFUN is, the hashtag FOWEFUN is spreading, because it needs to. Right, this week We've not got a Chinese communist this week. What we have got, though, is a guy from India by the name of Nikhil Seth. Now, the way that they write their names, whether that is actually supposed to be Seth Nikhil, I don't know. But anyway, he's the executive director of UNITAR, United Nations Institute for Training and Research. You can guess what they're going to be training people in doing, can't you? I'm interested in the individuals at this stage, so I'll leave the actual nonsense that they're spreading for another day. So, at the top right, it's got his bio and what it is that he's done to date, and essentially what you'd expect. Predominantly technocrat, civil service type, you know, the bootlicker that is just interested in living off of taxpayers' money. So the only interesting part to me was finding out the guy's background. So that's why in the highlighted in red I've got beginning in 1980 in the Indian Diplomatic Service. So that then leads to bottom left. What did the Indian government look like in 1980? Well, exactly as they had done for a number of years prior to that, dominated by socialists and nationalists. Now, not quite the same combination of socialists and nationalists that those two terms are normally associated with, but something of a fuck up nonetheless. Now, the one part about that I do find absolutely amusing is how there are certain socialist supporting types who will always say, no, that wasn't proper socialism again. Because whenever anything fails under socialism, it wasn't socialism. It was. So the two parts that I've got added into this in terms of where it says India and the tragedy of socialism, and then the Constitution of India, that's part of an article that I'll put in the descriptions that comes from the Adam Smith Institute, which gives a direct response to those people to let them know that yes, it was socialism. So essentially, unsurprisingly, what we've got here is yet another department in the United Nations. I mean, it literally is a toss-up, isn't it? It's either socialist or communist. And when you've got this entire blob that wants to become the governance of the world, you know, the government of the world, made up out of people that are clinging on for dear life to a consistently evidenced failed ideology, why the hell anybody is paying any attention to these people is just beyond me. Fortunately, insofar as this particular department is concerned, it seems like the only countries that are actually contributing to them are Qatar, Sainsbury's, Nigeria and Sweden. That's it. I mean, for Qatar and Nigeria, Qatar in particular, I mean, especially when you consider, like I say, I'll go into it later on when I'm running them through the process as I do with the UK government, but when you consider the sort of absolute bullshit that these people are trying to push, these various agenda of, including the genders and their equality and, you know, we're more equal than you type of thing, I'm sure that's going to go down really well in Qatar. So that's there's something seriously wrong with that one. Pretty much the same with Nigeria as well, considering they've got a fair few problems of their own. Sweden, I can see that. I can see that. But anyway, so yeah, the next person to highlight that everybody should be telling to fuck off. Right, so I'm hoping to get things done a little bit earlier tonight. So FOWEFUN again. So Cargill as part of the World Economic Forum. This is, again, you remember when I mentioned about the Conservative MP that is saying one thing, but then when you actually look in the background, they're doing something entirely different. Very similar scenario here. So Cargill heavily involved in agriculture and so forth. A very, very big part in agriculture actually. And obviously being part of the World Economic Forum, and that they're very much at the forefront of everybody's got to be careful about climate change that doesn't exist, and everybody's got to be going along the lines of intersectionality and, you know, all of the different bits of agenda out of the Great Reset. And this company are largely accused, as you can see from the various articles that I've got there, they're accused as to being one of the worst companies in the world, not only for environmental damage, but also financial malpractice. I mean, I will be putting some links in the description as normal and that, and the number of fines that this company has had issued is phenomenal. I mean, the amounts of money that they're being fined in that it's not an enormous amount of money each time, but it's just the sheer volume. So when you've got somebody that is turning around and telling everybody that they've got to look after the environment and they've got to be careful of this and that and the other and that, and yet if you took this company out of the equation, just them alone, and you'd probably solve half of your environmental problems. So it literally is this constant problem of somebody who will be in your face going, you have to do what we tell you, you have to do this, you have to do that, if you don't do this and that, oh, you're a horrible person, at the exact same time as right behind them, that's precisely what they're doing. So, I mean, seriously, I mean, how anybody can not look at these organisations with anything but contempt is just absolutely mind-blowing. It makes no sense whatsoever. So, like I say, if every week I will put in another new one, and that to show you that it's just one after the other doing the exact same shit. Maybe start looking into it yourself, and that, so that, I mean, is your company involved in the World Economic Forum? Are there products and services that you're using that you could find alternatives for? Because these people have got no good intention towards you, or anything else for that matter. So why help them along the way? Why help them push this Great Reset nonsense? Which, and I'll keep referring to this one, is that when everybody keeps on questioning, so, well, why are all these lockdowns happening? Why are all these businesses being shut down? When it's blatantly obvious from every normal thinking person, let alone the actual experts in the field, they're all absolutely bemused as to what the hell the governments are playing at with all these lockdown this and lockdown that, and the cases. It's all about the cases now. It makes no sense whatsoever until you actually understand that the shit that has come out of the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, even if we want to dismiss the idea of the virus having been intentionally created and released, which it wasn't. I mean, I'm sure something will come out along those lines, one way or the other later on. But to keep enabling this kind of nonsense, it's beyond belief, and people need to understand who it is that's behind this kind of push, and that's responsible for the vast economic damage that's being done. Because remember, as I told you last week, the vast economic damage is not going to be immediate damage to them, because they're too stupid to think of these things, in so much as that they think they're going to be okay because the agreement they've got with the governments is that, well, we'll take it out the taxpayers and that will keep you afloat. Then you will be the dominant business that everybody relies on. Great, but if nobody else has got any fucking money, they can't buy jack shit, and they're certainly not going to be paying any taxes, are they? So like I say, it's that socialist mentality. Everything's great until you run out of other people's money. And if all of these organisations are going to be setting themselves up to be the monopolies, not only are they going to run out of money because the general public, they haven't got enough jobs to cover it all. So you're not going to have the buyer's market. It's not going to be there. So then they're looking towards having diminishing returns, and then government's looking towards having diminishing returns, and it goes on. So goes the cycle until the government says, right, well, we're not getting enough money out of people, and so now we're going to take the companies as well, and that's when you go full-blown communism, because then they own the means of production, which means everybody fucking starves, everybody fucking dies. These people are too stupid to know their history. So, yeah. When you've got people that are just as hypocritical as this, you know that any ideology that they come out with, any of the fluffy rhetoric that they come out with, is not worth listening to. So, to hell with them. Hence, FOWEFUN. Right, I think that's going to do it for this week. Looking like I'm going to be quite a bit shorter than normal, which is a pleasant change. I probably should have done maybe one or two more departments from the BEIS, but I've had a busy week. So anyway, there's the my stuff at the side. I mean, when it comes down to intellectual property as well, by the way, and there's only certain levels that I will do this, but anybody that has looked at the ICPR 1200 website, you will have seen something called the UVAT program. UVAT is Latin, by the way, in case you didn't know. That is based around essentially being able to judge correctly the type of intellectual property, how it can be best utilised from a private equity perspective, rather than having a deal of handing intellectual property over to an existing producer. So it's more along the lines of setting up new organisations, new companies. I only do that from time to time, and generally speaking I'll only do that from time to time because unfortunately when most of the organisations do get in touch, or when the companies do get in touch, the amount of actual preparation that they've done is far from adequate, and it ends up then being a completely separate service in terms of anybody wanting the assistance to be able to develop to a stage where it is adequate. Any academic institution or anything like that, if they think that just putting together a quick pitch deck is the basis of entering the private equity market, you're wrong. It's not. The pitch deck is like it's your executive summary, and you only have an executive summary when you've actually got an entire plan behind it. And the amount of times that nobody has got a plan behind their pitch deck, it's it's one of those examples, and that is to when it comes down to actual business and business processes and how you actually start up a company, how you actually get financing and all this sort of stuff, the education sector is just woefully inadequate. It doesn't teach people correctly. But then the teachers themselves, they don't know. And I am talking about professors. I've come across enough of them in my time. And they're the ones that, generally speaking, and that they're the ones that are saying, oh, well, I've got a piece of intellectual property and that I can't produce anything, it's just on a piece of paper and I want 20% of the profits. I think, yeah, all right then. That's why I don't do so much of it. They don't seem to have an ounce of realism in the body. But, you know, it is there as a service for those that are capable. And then my assistance comes in a few different forms. But yeah, that's not what this is about. So okay, I think a shorter episode might not be a terrible thing. So oh, a quick message by the way, and that for the numpties that have decided to start putting in messages that have got absolutely no relevance to anything whatsoever and can't contribute anything apart from which it basically much amounts to. Just fuck off and go and watch something else, basically. Don't need you, don't want you. Neither does anybody else. So let's just have people that actually have half an ounce of intelligence making comments, yeah? That tends to be the preferred method. Right, I'll close out again with the Moirai directory. Again, it's still open. Any business that wants to put something in there. I'm still thinking about what I might do with the ending, whether I'll keep the Moirai directory or not. Don't matter. I don't know. We'll see. It's not a paid advertisement. I'll make that clear again. I'm not asking people to pay to have their name put up there. It's as simple as that. I don't need to be paid for that. So that'll do, I think, because I've got a few other things to do now. So, well, I hope you have a good week again. Hopefully all the lockdown shit and that ain't sending you too mad. But if it is, just understand it is all bollocks. And actually, before I go, what I will say is, if you do find that it is bollocks, and you do find that you're getting a little bit pissed off with things, you don't have to just sit there and say, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do. You don't have to do that. You don't have to put yourself in any kind of jeopardy whatsoever. The suggestion that I would make is that if you find a competent piece of footage or a competent paper, whether that be an academic paper or even an opinion piece, there's a number of doctors, professors, academics, professionals and so forth that are actually putting stuff forward. You can also have a look at the Keep Britain Free site. Have a look at the stuff that Ivor Cummings does. Well, what's his name? Michael Yeadon, in particularly. Michael Yeadon, look for him. Get a hold of some of that information and then use that and just send an email to your local MP, your local representative, and that's so that you've got some sort of voice within Parliament or whatever your political institution is in other countries. Write to them and say, look at this. Why are you not having a conversation about this? Why are you not having a debate about this? These are the facts. Can you answer against these facts without just saying, oh, if we don't, everybody will die. Oh, look at the cases. No, that's not good enough. They have to answer the questions. They have to be accountable. Pester them, if need be. Let it be known. The more people that turn around and say, this is ridiculous, it makes no sense, but without going mental and just talking crap. I mean, don't send anything over that says, oh, it's 5G or any nonsense like that. You know, don't send over a talk by bloody David Icke. Send over something that actually makes sense and that is a credible person, and say, this is the proper opinion. How the hell are you equating what you're coming up with? Because Michael Yeadon in particular, and that, I mean, he went to the same. He worked with what's his name, that Valance fella, and he is quite literally on an interview with James Delingpole. He has literally called that bloke out as a liar, and it's everything that he said he's backing up with evidence. So there are those opportunities to be able to present proper information to your local representative and say, answer this. Have a bloody good look at this and then tell me what the hell it is you think you're doing. Why do you think it is that our nations need to be shut down and victimised, as in a proper victimisation rather than all of the postmodernist bullshit of people losing their jobs, people not getting their hospital appointments, young kids committing suicide. I mean, I know from there's a student at a university nearby that is managed to, and this is not a joke term, has literally managed to escape from the university, because it's like we've been told it's literally like a prison for the kids, and she's now with a friendly a friendly place, not an organisation, a friendly place where she can be looked after, and has got somebody of her own age there as well, and that to be able to keep her company. Not a boy or anything like that, but you know, nothing improper. The impropriety has come about the fact that she had to escape from a bloody university. So there are things that people can do. If you've got genuine concerns about this sort of stuff, there are things that you can do. You don't have to just sit there and say, I'm helpless, okay? And if you want to ask questions about that type of thing as well, if you want to be able to see some of the information or get some advice as to where you can watch this stuff from Michael Yeadon, if you end up not being able to find it for yourself, put something in the comments and I'll put a link to something up there for you, okay? You don't have to put up with things. Fighting back against politicians is actually not as hard as it might seem. I do it all the time. Okay, so now I will sign off. Now that I've had my promotion screen up long enough as well. All right then, so cheers, and like I say, have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Cheers, bye bye.